we're speaking about mental health and mental wellness and what that means for crew. And Shereen has kindly volunteered to speak about her experience and also to touch on her initiatives. So Shereen, maybe you can start off with a little bit of background about yourself, when you started in the industry and the events that led up to you starting the group That's Not Okay.
Hi. So I joined the industry, it's about 5 years ago. I started out as a deckhand because I've got a background in construction. And then went into the sailing side of the industry. I was doing deliveries. And then I probably hadn't been in the industry even a year, actually. And I was starting my yacht master. I was really engaged in sailing. And I got attacked out in St. Martin when I was in between jobs. There was a guy, he tried to rape and kill me. It was a really vicious attack, left me with quite acute post-traumatic stress. So I took a little bit of time out, and I was just doing deliveries. I wasn't working on super yachts. And then 6 months later, my father passed away. So it was a pretty heavy time. And I did do one contract after my father passed away, but then I was just finding it really intense. I didn't find the yachting community to be very supportive. If anything, I was really isolated. If people didn't want to talk to me about anything, even especially when I was in St. Martin, like directly after the event at the crew house, people like literally avoided me. So yeah, I didn't feel like, and then when my father passed away, obviously I was quite emotional, so I didn't really feel like it was the right industry to be in to process that. Yeah, so lucky for me, I've got a few other professions. Like I say, I had a background in construction. I also used to do marketing and also beauty. I've got a bit of a mixed bag. So I left full-time positions for about three and a bit years, and I've only just come back to full-time positions now.
Okay.
The reason, so I've been writing a blog for the last few years about my recovery, and my aim was always to get back into yachting and to feel comfortable working, on a boat in a tight situation with with my confidence to sail as well.
So maybe we could chat a bit about that experience for you. So after the incident, it sounded like there was no support available to you. So how did you manage the emotional trauma, and what was it like to be on the receiving end of not getting any support?
Well, to be on the receiving, I was quite shocked, if I'm honest. I really couldn't believe that people would isolate me like that. And I understand now that it's because these subjects aren't talked about. So, when something like that happens in front of you, you ultimately have a choice. You can sit there in the discomfort of this, like pain that someone else is experiencing, and be there with them, or you can choose to walk away and pretend like it hasn't happened. Unfortunately, I didn't have that choice because it happened to me. And I think subconsciously a lot of people chose to just bear away with, I don't want to say excuses, but probably they told themselves things like, oh, she probably doesn't want to talk to anyone, or like blah, 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 which the reality was I was out there in the Caribbean on my own, no family or friends. This horrific thing that I could not believe had happened to me. Like, it was very violent. Like, I had a lot of hair ripped out. I was in a state, basically. My legs were bleeding. So like, just to be like left to stew on my own that's not what I wanted at all. I wanted just people around me to keep me busy or to keep my mind off. It would have helped, but hey ho, that didn't happen. I was kind of like left on my own. So yeah, I was shocked by that. Luckily, so I got a flight back to the UK pretty much like the next day, and it was Christmas Eve that I got attacked. So it's not the easiest time of year, I guess. I know people don't want to be upset and dealing with something like that. Luckily, when I got home, though, one of my best friends had just finished her PhD in psychology, specialising in trauma. So she came around, and I think that was having someone who knew what they were talking about new guide me kind of what I needed to do was that's probably like what aided my recovery the most. So she made me talk through everything, like try and remember as much as I could as early on as possible, and write it down so that the trauma didn't get like heavily embedded in my psyche. And then I obviously went to counselling, and yes, so having her, like having someone who understood psychology in my life was really the thing that helped me in terms of my emotional support.
Yeah. And for crew members that are victims of abuse or bullying or violence or sexual assault even, there can be a lot of shame and guilt associated with that. So they tend to avoid asking for help. What is your advice on something like that? If you feeling shameful of what happened and you're isolating yourself, or just because you're fearful of what other people think of you if you do bring it
up? Well, the first thing is I think we need to understand the culture that we're in, and especially in yachting, we're in quite a macho culture. It's very much a boys' culture, like a guy's culture. No one admits their vulnerabilities, so and there's still a bit of culture like that in the normal world, but yachting, it can be a little bit toxic, I think. So if you do feel ashamed and you feel like you can't speak up, like, you know, go talk to someone outside of yachting for a start. Like, unfortunately, this like, it's a bit of a bubble, and there are some great things about yachting. I don't want to say that, I don't want to slate it. I love this industry. I love being back in this industry. But unfortunately, there is this bravado, and it's prolific. And unfortunately, if you have had something like that happen to you while you're in this bubble, you can start to believe these untruths, and you can start to think, well, yeah, it is shameful. It is my fault. I shouldn't have been out drinking. I shouldn't have been wearing shorts, or whatever it was that is perceived as wrong. But get out of that and talk to a friend back home. I even found some of my friends rejected that, and they couldn't handle it as well. So I then also felt a bit ashamed, even if it wasn't in yachting. But I kept speaking to people. I just kept going, basically. So even if I did get a bit rejected, I knew that it wasn't my fault, and I kept telling myself that it wasn't my fault, and there's no reason to be ashamed. And if people don't understand it, that's their stuff, that's not mine, so I don't need to take that on. I kept telling myself that. And there's also a lot of support on the internet. And yeah, talk to someone who's qualified, I think. Because the other thing for me was, you can take on everyone's opinion, but a lot of people come from a perspective of fear and judgment. So I'm not going to take on those opinions because they're not valuable. Whereas I'm going to listen to a psychologist or to someone who has been through something like this. So also just be careful about the opinions you value. Like someone who's been on a boat who's super macho, who's like, oh my God, what you out drinking? Like, I'm not going to listen to their opinion because they have no concept of what I've been through.
Totally, yeah. And it's so important to seek professional advice because some of the feedback can be quite damaging if you're not speaking to someone who knows the theory and how to deal with specific situations like that. So your group that you've started, That's Not Okay, did that stem from experience? Sorry, it's so loud that the car's going past.
I know, sorry, I'm trying to cover up the microphone. That, and also this because you're on a boat in the middle of nowhere and you've just got a crew, like if you're working on a small boat, you've just got a crew of 5, or even if you've got a crew of 50, you can be isolated in a little bubble, and I think you can lose sight of what is okay and what's not, like what's not okay. And especially if there's a toxic culture on board and it's never been challenged, and obviously the culture is set by the captain. So if you get a captain who has raced up the hierarchy and maybe they just don't treat people with much respect or compassion, then of course that's going to filter down. And if that isn't challenged, or when it gets challenged, that person is fired, which typically happens in our industry. You can be left in a situation where you might be a junior on board, you might be completely green and be getting I don't know, sexually abused or spoken to in a really damaging way, like bullied, and you don't know if it's okay or not because everyone seems to accept this culture. So you're kind of like, I guess it's normal because it's yachting. And also that's the other thing that I see on a lot of the forums, like I'm a yacht crew and things like this, like welcome to yachting, that's yachting. And I don't think there's any culture or any, I don't think there's any reason to treat people in a nasty way or bully
No.
people, or like, you know, you can be a very respectful leader and have the power of that leadership, and you can do it with respect for other people's well-being. Like, you don't have to be nasty, and this is the reason why we started this group, because there's so much of it. And I think the other side of it is there's good and bad in all of us, and we have a choice. And I think a lot of people aren't aware that they're being nasty sometimes. They're not acting with their best values at heart. So I really wanted people to start, I wanted people to start reflecting on this really and asking themselves, you know, do I act in that way? Like, is that the best version of me? Or, you know, and if I'm not acting in that way and I'm being nasty, why do I feel the need to do that? Is there something that I need to resolve in myself? Like, do I need to go see a counsellor? So that's kind of why we started the group, really.
And I think, though, for something like that, given the context of yachting and how it's so easy for a toxic culture to manifest, it's so important to talk about it and do process work and training. Obviously, like, emotional intelligence is something that we're both passionate about and can see the value in. And those people who are bullying or who are the perpetrators usually are not self-aware that they are acting that particular way. And the only way to bring it through awareness is through feedback. And the best the best way to do that is onboard workshops and doing an emotional hygiene check, maybe twice a year when there's a crossing or end of season, or before the season probably, because you'd be too exhausted after the season. But just to rethink and be more conscious of our behavior and our interactions with others.
Yeah, and I think another thing that is really important is to have compassion for the perpetrators. And I'm not saying that these actions are okay, but what I am saying is you can't, like, when you do become aware that you're not acting your best and you're being, like, because I think this is what this journey taught me as well. Like, I wasn't really behaving at my best before I got attacked. I was like, that old Shereen was quite a different Shereen. And I don't know, like, when I became aware, I was like, oh, there's some people I didn't treat that great. And then I felt, you know, ashamed because of that. And granted, that kind of shame is probably valid, because, you know, shame is the emotion that you feel when you do actions that are away from your own value set. So it was really nice to have people around me who were compassionate and said, okay, well, that was you back then. You're aware now, and you know what? You can go and apologize, and you can right these wrongs. So I think it's really important to be compassionate to perpetrators when they do come through their awareness of that as well.
I completely agree with you, because it's usually the perpetrators who are the victims themselves.
Yeah.
And they're hurting, and that's why they're acting that way. And it's also their thinking about themselves is quite negative and harmful, but then they act in accordance to their own self-beliefs, and that becomes a reality. And then the way in which they act, they get a particular reaction to confirm their beliefs about themselves. So, for example, if you are an unkind person and go out of your way to be harmful, be overly critical, or put people down, then people are going to either fight back or avoid you. And you're going to feel isolated, and then that's going to reconfirm your belief, I'm not good enough, I'm an asshole, or whatever it is. Yeah.
And it's not easy, like, to bring that awareness to someone. I feel like I've become quite attuned to it, and I've literally been in situations where people have been screaming in my face. But I think if you are, like, bringing that awareness to someone, I think also you need to be able to be quite strong in your position and remind yourself that what is coming back at you is a reflection of what is going on inside someone else. Like, don't take it personally. Like that's, and what I've personally found is the more intense in someone's aggression or nastiness they are, the more the more pain they're experiencing. So if they've dealt with something that's been really, really painful in the past that hasn't been dealt with for years, it's, you know, it's like touching a really, really infected wound. Like, yeah, they're gonna scream and they're gonna fight back at whoever's touching that. So what I like, when I've been in these situations when, you know, I've accidentally touched on something, or I brought this kind of awareness to someone and with feedback, and they've got really angry or they've stopped speaking to me, I've reminded myself that that isn't a reflection of my self-worth. That's a reflection of what's going on inside them. And, you know, and if they need to like go away and be angry, like let them go through that process. And then typically they're going to come back and say like, I'm sorry, I've reflected on that now and you were right. But this also takes time. So if you are bringing that awareness, I think, you know, stay strong in yourself and understand that people's behavior like that, it's a reflection of what's going on inside them. It's not a reflection of your self-worth. Like, don't take any of this personally.
Yes. And even to have the courage to confront someone, obviously that's not easy, especially if it's someone that you feel is being antagonistic towards you. And you've got to be aware that the reaction first time round might not be so positive, but they will eventually, when they're ready, they will process it and either come back to you, or you just bring it to their attention at a different time, but do it very subtly but with kindness, so they don't so that they don't feel like they're being attacked, and the penny should drop, hopefully. But you can't make someone change. They need to have the willingness to change.
Yeah. And it's, you know, some people have been through some horrific things that, like, you know, the feedback is really hard, and I think we have to remember that as well. Like, yeah, if people are acting that way, there's a reason, like you're saying, it's painful, and then to hear that and be held accountable, you know, it's a bit of a tough pill to swallow. So, you know, it's so easy to like hand out, like, so, I know it's hard to hand out feedback compassionately, is what I would say. Like, people are so quick to judge, especially online, and give feedback out that way, but I don't think that's really giving feedback. Judgment isn't feedback in my eyes. Like, feedback is when you really care about that person and you're offering them this feedback as a gift for them to better themselves, rather than like judging them and being all high and mighty about it.
Yeah. No, that's lovely advice. So if people wanted to connect with you, because I know if you've gone through a traumatic experience yourself, it's so nice to connect with others that have gone through a similar situation. Are you available for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, so my blog is called traumaontour.com, and that's got my whole experience on. So people can Google that. Like, I was pretty raw with it from the start of my processing. So if people want to, I don't know, read that and feel like understand where they're at, and know that you can get through something. Like, that's my blog for the last 3 or 4 years, and you know, I'm back on boats now and I'm more courageous than ever. So that's like a kind of like inspirational blog. If you want to get in touch with me directly, then I've got my other website, which is ShereenSolomon.com, and there's a contact page on there.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Shereen, for your time and for being so courageous and creating this space for us to talk about mental health. And I hope that it inspires others too.
Yeah, me too.
I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, speak to you soon. Thanks for being you.